Hello, everybody. Welcome to Querying Web Archives. In what follows, we're going to do quick presentations from our team members, and then we're going to go into our larger presentation. So I'll begin with introductions. My name is Filipa Calado. I'm a PhD candidate in the English program at the Graduate Center CUNY in New York City, and I'm studying how digital humanities tools and methods might align with queer studies, methodologies, and frameworks. My dissertation takes a close look at popular tools for the digital humanities, such as text analysis, and sees how they might work within a queer studies ethos. Here I'm interested, and this is the interest that I brought specifically to this project, is looking at closely the mechanisms of digital tools and how they work and how we can deconstruct them and rework them in more theoretically rich ways. And now I pass it off to Corey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Clawson, and I come to this project with a background in comparative literature and Latin American studies. I'm a second-year PhD student in American Studies at Rutgers University in Newark, where I coordinate the PhD program in global urban studies. Lately, my work has been concerned with mapping networks of queer literary history and examining histories of queer community formation as they intersect with media. Dee.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dee, and I am currently a PhD candidate in critical social psychology at the Graduate Center. My interest has been how folks identify with various social identities such as race, gender, and sexuality, and this guided my approach in this project. I was particularly interested in the ways that we understand how the internet changed over time, especially as it relates to how we make sense of the communities we identify with. And now I will turn the time back over to Filipa.
Great, thank you. In what follows, I'll give an overview of our project's research goals and questions and we will contextualize some of the data sets for this project. Then for the bulk of the presentation, we'll discuss our methodology and ethical concerns. We'll conclude with a consideration of working on digital versus analog archives. So first, this project is an exploratory analysis of collections of web archives. We are a group of graduate student researchers who are working with the support of the Archives Unleashed cohort program to study web archives relating to queer communities, organizations, and web spaces. This slide displays a list of questions which are guiding our approach toward our overall project. For the purpose of this presentation, we intend to walk you through our process and methodology for addressing these questions, which we are still in the process of exploring and developing. Here, we're interested in querying both the material and methodology of web archival work, specifically how queer identities and communities interact with, are informed by, and form web spaces, as well as critical methodologies for studying digital archives. We are interested in exploring concepts like utopia, radicalism, normativity, religion, and conversion, and how they affect queer identity and discourse formation over time. How do these topics cluster and coalesce across various domains contained within the data sets? What vocabularies have been and are used by different groups to conceptualize homosexuality and other queer sexualities and identities over time? In pursuing these questions, we apply an understanding of queerness in space from queer studies scholar Jose Esteban Munoz. Munoz defines queerness as a desire, a quote unquote longing that propels us forward. He explains, queerness is a structuring and educated mode of desiring that allows us to see and feel beyond the quagmire of the present. Queerness is that thing that lets us feel that this world is not enough, that indeed something is missing. In the context of various opposing forces shaping the LGBTQ community at the end of the 20th and start of the 21st century in the United States, from the AIDS crisis to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, to the rise of same-sex marriage legislation across the country, Munoz makes the point that queerness, for its own political utility, needs to be theorized as something beyond reach. He emphasizes that despite some mainstream acceptance, the disparities in social and political gains in most cases do not extend to people of color and lower economic classes. We are interested in exploring how queer folks approached online spaces as the quote unquote here of the not yet here. Since the emergence of the internet, there has been a desire that it could fulfill a promise of community. However, early internet queer spaces seem to be siloed in much the same way that that queer spaces were marginalized offline, with the default user often assumed to be white, cisgender, male, and middle class. We are interested in exploring how this desire for a utopic community inflects and constitutes both queerness and space across the internet over time. And now I pass to Corey to discuss a little bit of the context surrounding our data sets.
Okay. As part of our application to the Archives Unleashed cohorts program proposing querying queer web archives as a project, we identified a handful of collections that capture portions of online queer history. The collections we are examining offer interesting variation in terms of their size, medium, and historical eras. The oldest collection we draw upon is the Sock Mott's web collection, which originated on Usenet in the 1980s. MOTS, spelled M-O-T-S-S, stands for the members of the same sex, an acronym designed to be innocuous enough to be approved by moderators. This community was comprised of engineers and academics with access to this online space through their employers and institutions. The mostly white and middle class community became one of the earliest spaces on the early internet concerned with queerness, which with discussions ranging from gay and lesbian book, film, and travel recommendations to scientific discussions on the origins of homosexuality. From the vantage point of 2023, this collection presents a fascinating contrast to contemporary attitudes and practices regarding online privacy and anonymity and the utopic possibilities of the early internet. Next slide. The US LGBTQ web collection is a set of hundreds of blogs and other websites identified and organized by the UT San Antonio Library's Special Collections, starting in 2011. The collection offers a decade-long overview of discourses about LGBTQ+ issues and the 2010s, including websites for local organizations or working on queer rights, such as the Utah Pride Center and Equality Michigan, as well as national organizations such as PFLAG and GLAAD. A significant portion of the collection also captures the work of organizations fighting against marriage equality, non-discrimination protections, and the elimination of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and as well as other efforts in this period. Examples of these websites are often religious in tone, focus, and argument, including Ex-Gay Truth and Hope for Homosexuals. In addition to websites for these various organizations, this collection includes captures of these organizations' social media presence and YouTube uploads. This large collection offers a window into the political discourse of the 2010s, inviting queries into regional comparisons as well as discourses of religion and rights. And lastly, interactive fiction in queer literature is a collection of websites by individual creators of interactive art, literature, and games. Collected by University of Michigan Library, this archival web collection is unique in that the authors of these sites opted into their materials being preserved, as well as their inclusion in our study as a result of their agreements with the university archivists. This handful of web pages is also unique in that the contents of the collection are more experimental in nature and originate in a later period first captured in 2018. The interactive fiction in Queer Literature Archive is about 800 megabytes, the smallest of these collections, while the US LGBTQ web collection is the largest at 1.1 terabytes. These collections, diversity in terms of medium, temporality, and offer unique points of contrast. Sock Mott's, a forum with origins in the 1980s, for example, is shaped by these contexts, as well as those of individual organizations, such as the Utah Pride Center constructing individual websites comprised of news items, mission statements, and policy arguments in a world with greater access to the internet, a more diverse user base, and more developed senses of media literacy, privacy, and shared conventions. In developing our project, we are incorporating these historical and formal contexts into our analysis as we refine our analysis. Now, Filipa will walk us through a bit of our process.
Now I'll explain a little bit of our methodological approach for this project, in particular as it relates to preparing and cleaning our materials. Crucially, we anticipated the process of exploring the data set would enable us to further develop our research questions and topics of interest. When diving into the data set, however, we encountered technical obstacles due to the size of the data, which halted, at least for the time being, further developing and refining our research questions. While these obstacles slowed down some of the theoretical work, the results in terms of methodology were generative. In what follows, I'll give an overview of a method for data cleaning in which systems with low RAM, such as my laptop, which has 8 GB of RAM, can work with large data sets. For example, just to give you an idea, even a 1% sample of our largest data set, the LGBTQ web collection, was still massive at 13 GB. To achieve this work, I had to make use of multiple data analysis and natural language processing libraries, as well as compression methods and functionalities for quote unquote lazy loading, multi-threading, and streaming data. These methods enabled me to work within a system that normally cannot handle such heavy data processing. So I begin with the largest collection, the US LGBTQ web collection, which, as Corey explained, is an archive of websites from LGBTQ organizations and spaces across the United States. First, I sought a solution for loading the 1% sample of this massive data set, and the sample was still large, containing over 500,000 rows, into my Python environment. Here, I cut down the columns to those in the spreadsheet, in the data set, to those that were absolutely necessary, and optimized some of the processing protocols, such as the engine and the data types, to remove overhead. When the data loaded up to my computer, I also removed duplicates and saved the data set to a smaller compressed file called a pickle file, which loads faster than CSV files. Then, to further reduce my memory load, I switched from the pandas library, which is the standard library for data analysis, to the polars library, which is a newer library that bases a lot of its methods on pandas, but is optimized for working with large data sets. This library offers quote unquote lazy loading and streaming functionality, where data is loaded in batches rather than all at once into memory. With the polars library, I was able to load up and save the data in several seconds as opposed to several minutes. And here's an image of the memory. After cleaning and removing after removing duplicates, it still was over 5 GB, it's very large. The next step was cleaning. Because the resulting file was still larger than 300 rows and taking up over 5 GB of memory, I opted to separate the data out by domain to make the tokenizing process more efficient. After experimenting with several tokenizers, I found the Spacey tokenizer, Spacey is a natural language processing library in Python, to be the fastest. Like polars, it offers batch processing and enables customization for removing elements that you don't need and adding those which you do. Here's an image of the Spacey code that I used. For this data set, I used the Spacey pipe method to tokenize the text, disabling computationally expensive components like part of speech tagging, dependency parsing, and named entity recognition, which you could add back later, but only disabling it for the tokenization process, while additionally targeting attributes for cleaning, such as symbols, email addresses, URLs, and phone numbers, which is really useful for cleaning web data. Here, I also made use of multi-threading to make the process more efficient. With this work complete, I was able to effectively clean the text. And now it is to prepare it for analysis. While this process was challenging and took even a few months to streamline, I found that being slowed down was generative in a way. I was continually confronted with the constraints which are unavoidable when you're working with big data. When data such as when data sets of this size that we're working with overloads the tools that we have at hand, it's an opportunity to step back and think about the kind of processes we're trying to impose en masse to large data sets. It's an opportunity to be careful about the choices that we make, about what absolutely needs to be removed, and eventually what kind of questions we can ask about this data. Now my research partner Dee is going to pick up on this thread in the discussion of ethics.
Hopefully you have noticed that ethics have played a major role in our decision process at every step of the way. While the Institutional Review Board, or IRB, may provide some ethical guidelines to projects, it is generally considered as a procedure to check off at the beginning of a project. Given the evolving nature of data, the volume in which we have access to, and our growing ability to analyze large volumes of data, IRB, which was originally conceived for biomedical research, was insufficient in recognizing the differences that born digital data offers. This has been a growing concern for many digital humanities scholars and has been important to how we approach digital archives, which often signals something that has passed and been commodified. In addition, guidance from policies like the Oakland Archive Policy provides suggestion on removal request and any access limitations. As a result, ethical considerations have to remain flexible and cannot simply be seen as a checkbox to check off at the beginning of a project and have to be interwoven throughout the project and in our decision-making process. Adopting these approaches, we know that data is a thing, a process, and a relationship we make and put to use. We can make it and use it differently. Hence, digital archive data is not just a recording of something from the past, but it's a complex process that requires interpretation and contextualization. As Corey had described, our data sets vastly differed from each other in terms of size, time period, and our process to attain access. When we looked at the data broadly, we also noted that it's spread across a 20-year period, of which we saw significant changes in how we relate to internet communities. Having data from a variety of mediums, from social media sites to Usenet groups to websites such as the Utah Pride Center, also meant that the context on privacy and communities differed based on how users were interacting. In addition, collections like the Interactive Fiction and Queer Literature Archive had a different access policy from the US LGBTQ web collection, where we worked with the librarians at University of Michigan who held the repository for this collection, and the individual authors to use their archive data for analysis. This meant that the authors were aware that we were using their data for research, which is not necessarily the case for the data in the US LGBTQ web collection. With our SOCMOTS collection, because they were derived from earlier bulletin board systems, they tend to foster a sense of community in a very localized context. Folks may very easily know the person who posted as someone in the neighborhood or even their next door neighbors. This form of community and internet space is quite different from our current interactions through Web 2.0, and as a result, our sense of privacy and sharing of private information has shifted. We would easily find folks sharing their physical address and full names in the SOCMOTS collection that was less so in the larger LGBTQ web collection. What all of this translated for us was that we had to consider very different approaches to cleaning and privacy across these different collections. Given the size of the US LGBTQ web collection, we weren't sure what was within the dataset, including what domains were collected, which meant that we took an exploratory analysis of the data with some preliminary cleaning. Given the density of the data and the time period of the 2010s, the top topics that surfaced didn't include personal information like the SOCMOTS data did. When we gained access to the SOCMOTS collection, which was a smaller dataset compared to the LGBTQ web collection, we realized that the method of cleaning and processing we applied to the larger collection could not be easily translated. Given its size of about 1,250 unique entries, we were able to employ close reading to filter out personal information such as full names, something that would be quite challenging to do with larger data set, even if we were to apply digital tools such as name entity recognition. As we continue to work on our data set, it has also informed how we present the result and share our interpretation within the context of the collection and time period. While we would have liked a one-size-fits-all solution for ethics and using web archives, what we have learned in our process demonstrate that this is quite an impossible task, even when we were working with data from similar communities. Had we been given access to all of our dataset at the start and had not been met with as many interesting challenges in our cleaning and analysis process, we might have thought that the application we took to the larger dataset could be easily applied across. In addition, it was also through exploring the collection that we were reminded of the ways in which the context of the web has shifted and a sense of community and what is safe to share changed in the period of time that we looked at. And now I will hand it over to Corey to conclude for further considerations as we carry on with our project.
Thank you. This project has illuminated some of the ethical challenges arising out of working with Internet archives. These include the terms contractually established between creators and archival institutions, Such negotiations suggest an adoption of conventions established in the analog world, with authors and politicians specifically specifying which materials can be accessed, how long after their death, and under what conditions. Ethical and legal concerns are equally important for collections predating the World Wide Web. In 2020, following sustained legal threats from community members claiming a right to privacy, the Internet Archive removed the UT Zoo Wiseman Usenet archive, a significant record of an era when many users shared their names, workplaces, and other personal information, with little concern of it ending up in the hands of researchers some 40 years later. Negotiating these concerns and the rights of individuals has been at the core of our conversations as we've discussed cleaning, representative sampling, as well as answering our research questions. Thank you everyone for joining us.